What a day. Good afternoon. What a time this is, right? We've waited, and we are thrilled to be here in this moment. The Violence Against Women Act addresses domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking, and this reauthorization does it in a more holistic way. As a pre-VAWA survivor of domestic violence, I personally understand the importance. And as the CEO of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, I also understand the importance. For those of us in this room, answering the calls of survivors, literally and metaphorically, we understand that survivors are not one-dimensional. Individual survivors have different needs and different life circumstances. Some live in rural communities, and others live in urban communities. Some have children and others do not. Some need housing, some need advocacy, and some do not. Some need housing, some survivors reach out to law enforcement for help, and others reach out to their communities. Some survivors are young persons and others are older adults. Some have disabilities, some do not. We believe that VAWA allows us to meet all survivors where they are with responses and services specific to their needs. For those of us in this room, such as myself, who have survived some form of violence, we know too well what can happen when our specific needs aren't met. NCADV, our colleagues of the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, and every person who has worked for the past 5 years for the reauthorization are glad to be here in this moment. We in this room also want to thank the advocates on the ground who have devoted their lives to working with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. Thank you. Advocates are the backbone of the nation's response to gender-based violence. And with this bill, this nation has committed to them as well. These 5 years of hard work to renew and strengthen VAWA would not be possible without the same tenacity and compassion of all, including bipartisan members of Congress and their staff. And including a man who became champion on these issues more than three decades ago. A person who saw the need, listened to survivors, walked with advocates, and challenged others to join him and those survivors and advocates to improve our nation's laws and help change the social norms. A man who led the effort in the Senate to write the first VAWA and to keep strengthening it over the years. A person I had the privilege of introducing in 2014 during our collective celebration of the 20th anniversary of VAWA. Here I am again. He has set the standard for ensuring that the voices of survivors and advocates are heard and that we continue expanding opportunities for safety, prevention, healing, and justice. I am honored and pleased to introduce the person who took up that charge and is now our nation's leader, President Joe Biden.
Thank you. Please, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. I should be clapping for all of you. Zahara, do I have permission to proceed? All right. Well, first of all, as I was standing there listening, I should say that thank all of you, everyone in this room. It didn't change the law. We set out, and remember, some of you way back when I first wrote this legislation, to change the culture. To change the culture. For real. So it's great to be with you all. And Ruth, it's been an honor to stand with you through these years. And she was a serious victim of violence, left for dead, basically, before this law was written. And you make me think of the women who were willing to come and testify before the whole world when I first started those hearings. It wasn't viewed, even among the advocacy groups, as necessarily a particularly positive thing to do. It was because, anyway, you know. Thank you for your courage, for being a hero, sharing your powerful voice, and standing up for thousands of women, and that could be said about most of you in this room. I want to thank the members of the Senate and the House, members of my cabinet, for all you've done. The idea that this took 5 years to reauthorize, I was out of office those years, and it drove me crazy. No, that's not why it didn't happen. But it drove me crazy. It drove me crazy, the rationale for why we weren't going to. Anyway, I want to get into that. I know some of you think maybe I should be out of office for another 4 years, but the point is, it's wonderful to see so many brave survivors and dedicated advocates and truly old friends. So many have worked so hard to modernize the Violence Against Women Act, to make it stronger and make sure that it endures. And the reason we've been able to do so much, make so much progress in the past 20 years is because of all of you. I know some of you aren't even 28 years old, so it doesn't count for you guys. But all kidding aside, it really does. Again, I keep coming back to you've changed the culture, not just the law. And I want to thank the bipartisan members of Congress who helped to get this latest reauthorization done. Brian Feinstein, Joni Ernst, Lisa Murkowski, and in the House, representatives, nobody worked harder than Sheila Jackson Lee. And I want to thank you. I learned a long time ago when Sheila wants something, just say yes, it saves time. And Jerry Nadler, a great friend and a great congressman, and Brian Fitzpatrick. Brian, thank you. Look, thank you for coming together and never giving up. You know, the fact is, it really wasn't so long ago this country didn't want to talk about violence against women, let alone as being a national epidemic, something that government had to address. As a society, we literally looked away. We looked away. In many places, it wasn't a crime, and I recall how many times I was told in the prelude to writing the legislation, this is a family affair. You don't understand, Biden. It's a family affair. When I began, along with others, to pursue this legislation that changes this issue, we were told that we would literally be responsible for the disintegration of American families in major press. It wasn't just the wackos. It was in the mainstream press. And we talked about creating shelters, give survivors a way out because so many don't have a way out, and their children. By the way, the vast majority of children on the street with their mothers are there because she's a victim of domestic violence. And here's what they said. Here's what they wrote. They said these shelters, providing shelters, was nothing more than indoctrination centers for women's liberation issues. Now, I can get you the articles. It's a fact. Not a joke. Not a joke. And calling the police meant having to stand in front of your abuser, your significant other, your husband, whomever, and say he did it. And I used to say when I'd get heat on this, when I spoke, I remember making a speech at the Chamber of Commerce, and someone said, "You're going overboard here." I said, "Let me ask you, Jack." I said, if you had a 320-pound guy who could bench 400 pounds stand in front of you and smacked you, you're going to say he did it? Because you know he's going to come back. Look, there were very few police departments that had trained personnel. I mean, very few. I'm sure there were some. I just can't remember any of them. No, I really mean it. As a matter of fact, I don't think there were any special victims units in most of the police departments around the country before this legislation was written. Now there's programs that are on TV and for the last 25, 30 years. No, but I really mean it. It mattered. That's what I mean about changing the culture. Look, and there were too few places you could go for advice or for help. Where would you go? And how many times? I remember the biggest fights I had were the second time around with universities. With universities. Where do you show up? Where do you report this? Well, we don't want to. I mean, major universities, not Podunk University, major universities. It took time to change the culture, and you did it. You did it. There was no national hotline. I remember going, all kidding aside, there have been millions of women who've hit that hotline button. All the brave guys I had talked to, they'd say, Biden, you're overdoing this. And I'd say, tell you what, if somebody who was twice your size beating the living crap out of you, you're in the same apartment with them, how do you go and pick up the phone and call for help? Women would hide and say, I can't say where I am. I don't know. Help me. That's how we got Microsoft and others in this fight with us, to help us physically locate so the police could pick up where that call was coming from. That was the background when I first wrote the Violence Against Women Act in 1990. To provide more protection against domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, to support survivors, and help them find ways out of their abusive situations. And say, why didn't she leave? Well, she didn't leave. She had no place to go, and she had 2 kids with her. No money, nothing. No family to go to. Leave? I've been asked time to time, the reason I guess I got a little overwrought about this legislation early on. Not that I ever get overwrought. I literally, the most oft-asked questions for the first 3 years of the act was, well, why are you so passionate about this? What, was your mother a victim of domestic violence? Was your sister or your wife, were they victims? Swear to God, that was the most oft-asked question of me. And I said, no, that's not the answer. I happen to be raised by a gentle, decent man who taught all of his children, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Lisa, you know this. You knew my dad. My dad would say the greatest sin of all that anyone could commit was the abuse of power. And the cardinal sin was for a man to raise his hand to a woman or a child. That's what this law has always been about, the abuse of power. Whether it ends in a rape or just a physical beat, it's about the abuse of power. So I believe that many of you in this room did, that I believe that too. And the only way we could change the culture was by shining an ugly, bright light on it and speaking its name. Make all the speeches you wanted. But until those women had the courage, and I remember in the back room holding and saying, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Can you imagine being among the first to stand before the whole damn world? And millions of people hear you recite how you were abused? It took enormous courage. At the time, Majority Leader may remember, we both got criticized for wanting to make it public. We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. That's why we held public hearings for this law. When there were senators and others who said it was too salacious for this to be public, for people to see. But I believed, and a lot of us did, that we had to let America know what was going on. Take the blinders off. Make them look at it square in the eye. All the ugly side of it. Because I believed, as all of you did, that Americans are basically decent, honorable people. But they didn't want to get involved. Didn't want to get involved. How many times have you been in a crowded airport or in a circumstance where you see a man not physically beating, but abusing a woman? You just, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to. I don't know what to do. Well, I believe that if they could see the truth with what was going on, we could begin slowly to make change. And that's exactly what you all did. That's what happened. This law broke the dam of congressional resistance and cultural resistance. And it brought this hidden epidemic out of the shadows. Its introduction, it introduced our nation and so many brave survivors. Those stories changed the way America saw the issue. I mean, in a literal sense, it's hard to believe, even when I go back and think of how it started, where it was. As a practical matter, things began to shift. The legal and social burdens away from survivors and on to perpetrators and where they belonged. It made addressing gender violence a shared priority with a determined, coordinated response. It created a hotline, as I said, for millions of women who have used the hotline. And again, I'll never forget being told the first time, I said, "What did you do?" She said, "I got behind the drapes. I held the phone. And I said, pray God, pray God. Don't let him hear this. Pray God, pray God." It supported shelters and rape crisis centers, housing, legal assistance, creating life-saving options for women and children all across the country. And it helped train police officers, advocates, prosecutors, judges, court personnel to make the entire justice system fair and more responsive to the needs of survivors. I'll never forget, Chris, I went to the family court when I was writing this, and the family court in my state's like many of yours. And I watched, because I was told this had happened, I watched a woman come up to the desk and say, I want to report my husband's beating me up. Well, why don't you have a seat over there? Not a joke. Go back and check your family courts back in the day. That's what happened. That's okay. You go over here. We'll get to that. No. I need help now. You know, the law has saved lives. It's helped women rebuild their lives. The hardest thing to get done was arrest on information. Because what used to happen is, a cop may be in the street and see a husband or a boyfriend or a man, anyone, smack his wife. And he'd come over and say, "Do you want to bring charges?" What the hell is she going to say? "Yeah, I want to bring." We got the law changed to say the cop can arrest on information. He saw it happen. He saw it happen. And all these tough guys. Even in 1994, we knew there was much more we had to do. You know, that was only the beginning. That's why, because of all of you in this room, every time we reauthorize this law, it's been improved. It's not like we didn't know we wanted to do these other things in the beginning. As we did as much as we could and keep trying to add to it. You remember, you were sat at my desk a lot of time with me on this. Broadening from domestic violence includes stalking, sexual assault in 2000. That was the change made. Expanding access to services for immigrants and communities of color in 2005. That was the change. Restoring jurisdiction of tribal courts. Over non-native domestic violence offenders who abuse women in Indian country. We did that in 2013. Extending protections to everyone, regardless of sexual orientation and gender identity in 2013. And I'm sorry to go on, but you all the country owes you. All of you. I really mean it. Thank you. The law kept growing stronger. It's not like we didn't know in 2005 we should be dealing with the things we dealt in 2013. It was getting it done. Each link in the chain that we're building made a difference, makes a difference. Yesterday, I signed the bipartisan government funding bill. Thank you very much for that. And consequence, we forward the next link in the chain. Not only did we reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act through 2027, and I often wonder why the hell we can't reauthorize it. It's like the Voting Rights Act. I thought we had won when I got Strom Thurmond to vote for it and extended for 25 years, and then the court came along. But at any rate, that's another issue. But look, you know, just think about this. If this affected manhood, men, I don't think we'd have a problem, you know, doing it for even longer, making it permanent. But anyway, that's a different thing. Look, We delivered more help to survivors in rural areas. We understand and underserved communities for a simple reason. There's no place to go. You know, whether it's Arizona or whether it's Michigan, wherever it is. You're in a rural area, you call, you get help, you do get help, and then they leave, and the next nearest town is 20 miles. How long does it take for the cop to get there? Tribal courts will now be able to exercise jurisdiction over non-native perpetrators of sexual assault, child abuse, sex trafficking, and so much more. You've all added new services and resources for folks most underserved communities, the LGBTQ community, survivors of those rural communities, providing more support, legal services for law enforcement to get training they need to help handle the trauma of survivors are experiencing. And by the way, it's not a criticism of the police. For all the mistakes police make and all the things they do wrong, we expect them to be everything from a counselor to an expert on sexual violence to an expert on all these things. But, you know, these are vast majority people with, you know, degrees that are 2-year degrees after school. I mean, they're smart, but we expect them to be psychologists. We expect them to be everything. So we established a new civil rights cause of action for those whose intimate images were shared on the public screen. How many times have you heard, I'll bet everybody knows somebody somewhere along the line, that in an intimate relationship, what happened was the guy takes a revealing picture of his naked friend or whatever in a compromising position, and then literally, in a sense, blackmails or mortifies that person. Send it out, put it online, giving survivors real resources against abuse now. Ex-partners and stalkers who seek to humiliate and hurt them. You've created new programs to help end the backlog of the rape kits. And those rape kits, by the way, I don't know, you ought to go to your major cities, those of you in the House and Senate, this group probably has, which I have done. And this backlog is so significant. You could solve literally a significant portion of, look, the only thing I learned that's worse than for a woman, worse than a woman who is abused or raped and says it's Charlie who did it and no one believes her, him against her. And when you can take a look, if you take a look at those rape kits and went through them all, you could identify and arrest probably 40, 50% of the rapists in America. They're all there. Their DNAs are there. It's all in line. And run it against the whole panoply. Very few rapists rape only once. So look, there's a lot that goes unprocessed. And we have to make sure survivors get compensation. And if there have been delays in their cases, we've made improvements in the National Criminal Background Check System to help states investigate and prosecute cases when abusers who are barred from purchasing firearms attempt to do so. That we've done federally. Quite frankly, that's one of the things that held up this bill for much too long. Those are just a few of the ways we've strengthened not we, you've strengthened the law, because I just came I'm back on the range again. But look, it comes on top of the work we've done together over the last years to make progress. We know the pandemic only exacerbated instances of domestic violence and sexual violence. It shot up like a Roman candle. And through the American Rescue Plan, the administration directed $1 billion in supplemental funding for domestic violence and sexual assault services. They're badly needed. We work with local public housing authorities to make sure that survivors trapped in a bad situation can find safe new housing options in public housing, because they don't have much to go. We also made landmark reforms in military justice system to help end the epidemic of sexual violence and harassment in armed forces. Fundamentally changing how the military investigates, prosecutes sexual assault, domestic violence, and other related crimes. Thank you, Kristen Gillibrand. Thank you, Jackie Spicer. Is Jackie here? Stand up. Stand up. You did an incredible job. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Earlier this month, I signed a bipartisan bill that ends what we know as forced arbitration. That's wonderful, isn't it? No, but I mean, the small print, you sign a contract, and the small print says you can't do anything if your boss, male or female, if you end up getting abused, if you end up doing something, you know, then you can't, you have to do it internally. No more. No more. Really? And 80% of the people who sign those don't even know what's in the contract. The mechanism prevented too many survivors of abuse and harassment in the workplace from having a choice to get their day in court. Look, there's just a few of the steps you've all taken and how much you've improved this legislation. But as everyone in this room knows, this work is not going to stop. It never stops. Today, 1 year since a gunman killed 8 people in Atlanta, 6 of whom were women of Asian descent. These horrific murders are a reminder that we still have work to do to put an end to misogyny and racism and all forms of hate we have. We're never going to get it all done. We can't ever stop trying. As long as there are women in this country and around the world who live in fear of violence, there's more we have to do to fulfill this sacred commitment. No one, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, should experience abuse, period. And if they do, they should have the service and support they need to get through it. And we're not going to rest. But in the meantime, all of you should be enormously proud of what you've accomplished. This reauthorization is testament to the power of your voices and your tireless dedication to changing things for the better. And one last thing. Some of you in here helped me work on the International Violence Against Women Act. I'm coming back. Seriously. And I'll tell you a very short concluding story. When I was vice president, I can't remember, probably the 7th year in or thereabouts, I was in India. And I met at the home where Mahatma Gandhi was able to be hidden for a long while. And I met with 2 of the daughters of India's most serious liberators. And you know, I thought they were going to ask me questions about, you know, U.S.-Indian relations. I said, can you help us write a Violence Against Women Act? Not a joke. Just by some of you speaking out, Republicans and Democrats, just by your speaking out about how we abhor those nations that do in fact call for and go through the list, is changing behaviors. I think we have to be even stronger than that, but that's another boring speech. But look, let's keep going. Thank you all. May God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, thank you, thank you.